I watched like 5 minutes of your live from last week on my dad's back porch.
Oh, I hope you enjoyed. It was a fun time. I was really glad that everybody showed up. It was really delightful.
Yeah, it looked like fun.
Yeah.
I know. Good questions. Good question from Clayton.
Yes, it was so lovely to be joined by our little YouTube family.
Our little cadre of YouTubers.
No. I'm coming to you today tired, a little tired.
I kept thinking today was Wednesday, and it's not.
Yeah.
It's just we've had some beat downs this week. Today even.
Yeah. I think I also did I did a lot of like camera time already today, and so that's it.
It's
but
true.
Also the world feels tiring today.
Yeah,
and I don't know why. Oh, you know what it is for me? I started off the day, we'll have Eleanor edit this out of the podcast. Poor podcast people. I started off today looking at a map of the Delta variant in the United States, and that made me tired.
Super. Do you see we were 100,000 new cases yesterday?
And the map that I found on NPR is like by county.
Cool.
And I think there's like 4 states without any county that's above the normal, like that you should be masking in. And I was like, I am tired. I identify as tired.
I identify as tired in the immortal words of Hannah Gadsby.
Oh, God, love her.
Identify as tired. Yeah.
Okay, well, shall we get...
Let's hi, we're live. If you're just watching us like mumble through our morning. Oh, kids. The world today.
It's just the world is a lot, and we have 4 empathy exercises for us today that are going to be continue to make the world a lot. I'll be really honest. There's one that's both wonderful and a lot. So we'll kind of go. Let's start with that one, shall we?
Yeah.
Okay. So for anybody who hasn't been following Olympic fencing, which may or may not be your jam, no judgment on this end.
I mean, it's amazing the things that I find myself caring about when I watch the Olympics.
I have a deep and abiding passion for the steeplechase, the human steeplechase. I love it. But yeah, so Olympic fencing has been mired, the American team has been mired in the fact that there is a gentleman who has been accused credibly of sexual assault and was still allowed to compete on their team. Nearly every woman in the Olympic Village said they did not feel safe with this gentleman around them.
Yeah, and they made they invited him on the team.
Yeah.
And then they made like safety plans for the Olympic Village in case he, assaulted somebody.
Yeah. So what we could have done instead was just not allow him on the team, but that was not the choice that the USOC.
Especially he's not a main fencer. He was like a filler.
Yeah, I'm entire. The only answer to any of this is rape culture and patriarchy, because other than that, it just does not make sense.
Yeah.
But anyway, massive kudos to his teammates, who then, in protest and to show solidarity with survivors, wore pink masks and said specifically that they were not their fencing figures, but like the COVID masks.
COVID masks, yeah.
To show that they did not want him on the team. And this was not their choice, and they stand with women. So it is disgusting that he was allowed on the team because of his behavior. It is beautiful, their response to it. So that's what we mean by both ugly and beautiful today. So that's empathy exercise numero uno.
Numero uno. Empathy exercise numero dos. We're sticking with the Olympics. And we talk about this all the time. I don't know why I'm like reverberating.
You're not on my end.
Oh, okay. Good. Just on my end. Great. We've talked a lot about gender in the Olympics, as we just did in our first empathy exercise, but also kind of like the expectations of female athletes and how they're treated differently. And I know we talked about the uniforms that handballers in Norway were required to wear so that they could show more of their tuchus. But in some good news, along these lines, we had the German gymnasts wearing unitards ankle-length unitards to stand against the sexualization of athletes who feel uncomfortable with shorter, more revealing uniforms. So thanks very much, ladies on the German women's gymnastics team. I was watching beach volleyball last night, and they're in like the teeny tiniest bikinis.
Oh my gosh. I actually was, when I was watching with our friend of the pod, Cheryl West Lung, when she was up here a couple weekends ago, I was legitimately almost on nipple watch for some of those bras. Like I was so nervous for these women. Like, why can't they wear supportive things?
Like, I've played beach volleyball like a lot as a volleyball player. And I've done it in bathing suits. It's not cool. You get wedgies, you get sand in places you don't want sand. Like, why can't they just wear spandex shorts?
I don't understand.
They're so tiny. And like literally after every play, they pick their wedgie. Every play. I'm like, why are we doing this?
This is also my question about diving. Like, there's lots of wedgies with diving too. I don't know if anybody knows physics, but when you hit water really quickly, like, why don't we let them wear the shorts? I don't know.
Because ladies' butts have to be on display all the time, apparently.
I guess. I mean, I think for dudes too. Like, I am, cis het and thirsty, but like those poor gentlemen divers also need to feel potentially more supported. But
I know. But before we move on to our next empathy exercise, I do just have to say, how joyful is it that Tom Daly has been crocheting the entire time?
Is he crocheting or knitting? Which one is it?
He's knitting. Sorry, he's knitting things for Team GB the entire time from the stands. It's the cutest thing I've ever seen, and I love it so much.
Yeah, Tom Daly and his husband Dustin Johnson Black are two of my favorite like couple goals.
Yeah,
I love them a lot.
And Tom, we could make it an adjacent empathy exercise, because talk about deconstructing masculinity.
Seriously.
And like or broadening our understanding of masculinity and what it means to be a human. He's just like, no, I like knitting. I'm gonna do it.
I don't want my medal to get scuffed.
It was the cutest thing.
It's like, I don't want your medal to get scuffed either, buddy. I think that's great.
I know. And as per usual, our friend Jay agrees with us. Tom is adorable. He is adorable. So is the knitting. Okay, empathy exercise next. This is the one you found from the National Enquirer. I'm going to let you handle it.
People on the podcast, I'm making my grumpy face. Because in the year of, or as I usually say, in the year of our Lizzo 2021, the National Enquirer decided to do a issue ranking beach bodies. Several things. A body that is on a beach is a beach body.
That's what?
It's literally the requirement.
That's all there is.
I am increasingly disturbed by the presence of these tabloids. We talked about this in our Crown coverage, but I just keep thinking about Michael Hobbs's point about royalty and that like being famous is a human rights violation. And this entire spread, which we will actually, as a decision, not be linking to, because it doesn't need anything else.
It doesn't need the clicks.
It doesn't need the clicks. We will link to a couple screenshots of it on somebody's Instagram account. I believe Feminist Voices Instagram account. These people are just living their lives. They're on beaches. They're on boats. They're in pools. None of this was a photo shoot. Not a single one of them.
Who cares? It's none of our business.
Like, why? Why is this happening?
It's none of our business.
And the captions were abominable.
Atrocious.
Like guessing their weight and like, oh, so disgusting. My favorite though was Tess Holliday, who is a model, very fat positive model, who essentially said, this is the most hilarious thing I've ever seen. Let me see if I actually have her direct quote. No, I do not. But it is, wait a minute, pause. Sorry guys, pause. No, I do not have her reaction. But other people in here, Tess Holliday, Katie Holmes, they're angry that her stomach has ridges because she is leaning over. I don't know if they know that that's in fact what bodies do. Kurt Russell and Goldie Hawn have let themselves go into they are lumpy. Jennifer Aniston is in here. Kate Hudson is in here. These are all the worst ones, by the way. Kris Jenner, Leonardo DiCaprio. Robin Thicke has a dad bod now. I didn't know that Robin Thicke. It doesn't matter. None of it matters. None of it matters. None of it matters.
It's not our business. It's not our business at all. And yeah, I wish I was surprised, but
I was a little bit surprised at like how egregious it was, like just a little bit, because I think like I live in such a delightful little body neutral bubble that I forgot that this exists, and I don't go grocery shopping anymore. That's John's job, so I don't encounter the front cover of the National Enquirer anymore.
Yeah,
I forgot. I just forgot.
Oh, cool.
And the last thing we're going to be talking about really briefly.
Yep.
Is this may seem like a little bit of an odd empathy exercise. So give us a minute. We'll get you there. We promise. You may have noticed, or you may not have, that in the last couple of weeks, Disney Plus released the movie Black Widow onto its streaming platform. It was supposed to come out last year in the regular times, the regular theaters, whatever. It was delayed. Scarlett Johansson, who plays the Black Widow, Natasha Romanoff, has been advocating for this movie to be made, I believe, since 2012, which was the second movie that she was, this like second Marvel piece of franchise that she was in. She has been a staple throughout the entire thing, and as of right now, she was the last woman. Like essentially, Captain Marvel got a movie before she did, but we've known Black Widow for a lot longer.
Yeah.
So all of that is annoying. Scarlett makes the movie, makes it with Frances Pugh. That's not her name.
Frances, isn't it?
Isn't it Frances? Is it? I'm losing it. No, it's something else old-fashioned, but I don't think it's that.
It's Pugh.
Pugh, yeah, but I don't remember what her first name is. I'm losing my mind. Anyway, a delightful person who I have seen in several other things, including Little Women, and really enjoyed her. And the guy from Stranger Things. This all appeared to be a delightful time, okay? Here's the issue. They structured Florence. Thank you, Jay. Florence.
Jay showing up.
Jay coming in with the win. Thank you so much. So Florence Pugh, thank you. And I know Jay has also seen the film, which I have not gotten a chance to see yet. So all of this notwithstanding, the movie comes out. When they signed the contracts, the agreed upon money was for a theatrical release. Without the consent of any of the performers, Disney switched it to a streaming release. This is a violation of a labor agreement. Mm-hmm. That's all this comes down to. Yes, the money is that Scarlett Johansson should have taken home $200 million and she took home 20. In all of her statements, it is absolutely not about the disparagance of those two numbers. She has been very clear that this is a labor violation. Yeah. And regardless of what you feel about Scarlett Johansson, people have feelings about her with capital F's. She is a worker. She is a performer whose contract was violated against her consent. Yeah.
And I think what's so interesting about it, speaking of gendered perceptions of people, is interesting and upsetting is Disney Plus's response, yes. Which a lot of gender equity organizations jumped on real quick and explicitly called it a gendered attack. They called her selfish and some other words that are very gendered in the way we talk about things. You know, Kristen and I were talking about this yesterday. And we were just like, they would have never done this to Downey. They would have never done this to Evans.
No.
Or Hemsworth. Or like any of the major men from the MCU. They never would have done this to. And we all know that, right? So like the fact that they're coming for Scarjo is just so sadly predictable. But, you know, it actually fits really well with our topic today of the gender pay gap, because it's a ripple effect of that, right? That like when women speak up about violations of their labor contract, they're attacked in a way that's very gendered. And there's a huge disparity in those salaries.
Anyway, Yeah.
Anyway.
We'll also, in a couple minutes after we kind of unpack what the pay gap is and kind of what pay equity looks like, we're going to return to the Activision. The state of California has sued Blizzard Activision, which is a massive video game publisher and provider and creator and everything else. And one of the things they have sued them over is a pay gap equity issue. So we'll cover that in a couple minutes. But first, so it's not like an empathy exercise. It's like an adjacent thing. Anyway, we'll get to it.
Just stick with us. We'll get there.
Guys, trust us. We led you wrong before, I'm sure many times, but we've never tried to. So what we're going to do now for a couple minutes, and please, everybody who's joining us, we see lots of friends. We'd love to know where you're from. If you've got questions about the gender pay gap, we're always here to answer, and we'd love to talk about it. Not that we love the gender pay gap, but we do love explaining it. Hello, Omar from France. It is delightful to see you live on a live, friend. So,
hello, Omar.
First of all, before we get into anything else, I would like Dr. Erin, could you please read the statistic that you read earlier about the days thing? And we'll start there.
Yeah. So real basic, the gender pay gap is the pay gap that exists between average men and average women. And I use that in quotes because we talk about intersectionality all the time here. So obviously on the basis of racial categories, ethnic categories, differences in ability, job skill, it varies. So these are all like averages. But on the average scale of things, it's not great. So the gender pay gap recognizes how long a woman or a person in a category non-white man has to work in order to make the same amount of money that a man makes in a calendar year. So we are doing this today on Black Women's Equal Pay Day, which means that Black women have to work 579 days. They would have to work all of 2020 and up to today, August 3rd, 2021, in order to earn what an average white man does in 365 days in only 2021 or 2020, excuse me. So that's the basics of the pay gap. I have a graphic I could try and share.
I believe in you.
I know you do.
So while you're doing that, I will also briefly explain I want to unpack some of the things that you will hear people say is a myth about the gender pay gap. There we go. Here we go. Visuals for our podcast friends. This will be linked in the show notes.
I did
it. We're very, very excited. Erin shared a graphic on StreamYard, which often defeats us.
Often confounds me.
This is a big day here at Abby Research. Big day. This is a good reminder that the top of the graphic says because of the gender pay gap, women have less money for a rainy day.
Yeah. And this is from our friends at the AAUW, American University Women. I forget what the first.
Yeah, American Association of University Women.
Of University Women. So this shows you again what I was talking about in this scale. And if we break up categories of women based on racial or ethnic categories, then we start to see these differences. And so Asian American women do better than white women, and then Black women, then we have Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander women, then American Indian, Alaska Native American women, then Hispanic women, much later in the year. And we'll be highlighting these days as we go along, as we are wont to do. But I think this graphic was so good for showing just how much little money you make compared to those good old white men.
Yeah. And like I said, if you Google gender pay gap, some of the very first things you're going to come up with are like the thing that Google's going to let you fill in is gender pay gap myth.
Yeah.
So really quickly, let us debunk that myth. Let us debunk the debunking really quickly. So what you're going to see over and over again when it comes to the gender pay gap as a myth is that it's all about really negotiation tactics and salaries.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they'll sometimes push back, well, Hispanic women, there are no, most of them are cleaners or whatever, and white men don't do that job. Okay, let's have that conversation at a separate time. But they like to pretend that matters in this conversation.
And that explains it. But when actually, it tells us a lot.
It tells us a lot. So it's not about negotiation tactics. Generally, as a rule, women negotiate less aggressively than men for their jobs. They accept pay instead of advocate for pay. That is a truth. Absolutely. That is not why the gender pay gap exists. It might be a factor for some women, but you don't negotiate your salary if you're a hotel housekeeper. Might be able to negotiate your salary if you're the CFO of Comcast. So there's some other things there that also go into it. It does not take into account the claims that the gender pay gap is a myth, does not take into account the fact that, like, for example, it was illegal for women to have credit cards until like the 70s. And it does not take into account that we don't get basic financial education, that women girls are segregated out of math classes at a really young age. It doesn't take that stuff into account. And then when we get into the race stuff of it all, it also doesn't take into account generational wealth or redlining or slavery or the lack of reparations. It doesn't take any of that into account, their claim that this is a myth. And because all of those things are true and happened, and some of them continue to happen, some of the things I just listened are not past tense, they are present tense. The gender pay gap is a very real and pernicious reality.
Yeah, and I think it's always a great opportunity for us to use examples like this to showcase what we mean when we talk about systems and cultures and kind of the big picture elements of this, and that you can pull threads of the gender pay gap and it will lead you back to these larger cultural issues of, the way we've gendered society, the restrictions placed on women, and then women of color as, an added category on that. So, last year when we talked about the 100-year anniversary of suffrage and everyone was super excited to celebrate the passage of the 19th Amendment, not a lot of people, aside from our friends at the 19th and the And Nothing Less podcast, were talking about the fact that it was only for white educated women who got the vote. So there's always been these layers of cultural and systemic oppressions and restrictions that filter into the way we pay people and the way we evaluate and place value on work. And so it's not hard to see all of this impact. How can you go to grad school if your family hasn't been able to establish generational wealth because you were forced to migrate from lynching in the American South in the 1920s and weren't allowed bank loans and, all of this kind of stuff? You can unravel a lot of threads and you can build a lot of context. And that's why we talk about the gender pay gap so much, because it's a buzzy buzzword that allows us to talk about context and historical and, cultural systems that are in place. And boy, do we love to talk about those.
Gosh, I love systems. So this is a great time to bring in the Activision thing, because it is literally happening right now. So the Activision, for anyone who is not in my marriage, Activision and Blizzard Entertainment. So just in complete full disclosure, my husband used to work for Activision. He was hired by a company called Vivendi. Vivendi was then bought by Activision. And he has feelings with a capital F about Activision. And he has a lot of feelings about it. And so I watched Emily D. Baker's coverage with him of this lawsuit. He worked for Vivendi Activision for 5 years, from 2005 to 2010. And in the game industry in Ireland before that, but he worked for them in Los Angeles. And every once in a while I would pause what I'm about to say to you guys and look at him and be like, yeah? And he's like, oh, I heard worse. I saw worse. Stuff like that. And he's been, he didn't see the sexual assault. Trust me, my husband would have said something, but he saw a lot of the jokes and a lot of the things. So one of the problems with the gender pay gap as well is that women don't, one of the cultures in the United States is that we don't ever talk about how much we make. And there's but it's union busting why we don't do that. But there's, in some culture, in some situations, it's probably not great to talk about how much we make, because how much you make is compensated in some weird ways potentially, but we don't. And so women have to fight really hard to find out what they're compensated for against their male counterparts. And then you have companies like Activision with openly hostile HR environments, where not only is the gender pay gap happening, just dollars on a page, but there's also things like a complete lack of maternal or parental leave.
Yeah.
There's also a lack of dignity for women in the workplace. There's a lack of promotion opportunities. There's direct allegations in the lawsuit, which I've read reported in many places as this, many women came forward and told this story of being actively passed over for promotions because they were not men, and told that they were passed over for those promotions because they were not men. This is illegal as hell, but this culture is allowed to perpetuate because it's a lot to get a lawsuit together and all those kind of other things. This is massive that the state of California is doing this. I don't want to say they have it in the bag because I have no idea, but this is the first time in my living memory that a state employment and fair housing agency has sued a company for being so egregious.
Yeah.
So it's bad. It's bad. It's bad.
It's not good. And then today we had even the news of a report from the FBI revealing that that male colleagues in the FBI had used explicit photos of their female colleagues, usually taken undercover, to lure sexual predators. And so, you talked about kind of the other aspect.
Dubious consent on behalf of the female agents.
Yes, where the women either did not know their pictures were being used or were told that they could not protest that their pictures
were or didn't understand the implications or whatever. So dubious consent on that front.
Dubious consent. Yeah. So this is what we mean when we say these kind of other elements that go into it, right? The lack of parental leave or family leave, whether you have parking for pregnant coworkers, what's her face? Sheryl Sandberg talked about that at Facebook. As much as I dislike her and Facebook, she was the one that was like, "Hi, can I have a closer parking space? Because my ankles are sore and I'm carrying 2 bowling balls."
Yep.
And all the dudes in the room were like, "Oh, I never thought of it." Okay. It's like Alyssa Mastromonaco getting tampon machines in the White House. They hadn't thought of it. It's not their problem. So all of these things are indicative of this imbalance and inequity that exists in the workplace, and they all feed into each other.
Yeah, because do women leave the workforce at a greater number than men? Yes. The reasons that they leave the workforce in greater number than men are, please see the last 5 minutes of our discussion. It's a lot, and it's a mess. And the beautiful thing about this, in a certain way, though, I just want to say this, is that these are averages.
Yeah.
And so there are companies that absolutely are paying, equal pay for equal work across the board, especially smaller businesses. When I look at the data for this, it's often the Fortune 500s and up, to be completely honest.
Yeah. Or like the U.S. women's soccer team,
Yeah, or a federal government. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So, which shout out for that, by the way, if you haven't read that journey or heard that journey, there's a great, evidently, documentary I haven't watched about that, I believe, on the Peacock. We've also reviewed the Caitlin McInerney. I can't remember the book, The National Team. We reviewed it here on the channel. And that it talks about Megan Rapinoe kind of spearheading, but certainly not being the first one to agitate for it. Yeah. Equal pay. Abby Wambach was a huge part of that conversation as well. And this year, people stepped into the gap to pay them what they would have gotten paid if they were men, because even now they weren't getting paid what they would have gotten paid if they were men.
No,
because why? That would be silly. And the WNBA agitates for this all the time as well. And there's lots and lots of excuses that people give. But what it comes down to is that we have a system set up for the prioritization of white men who if they have children, somebody else is the primary caregiver. The whole system is set up for white married men who are not caregivers, and or men who are not caregivers, in terms of some other to be completely honest here,
and usually like cis het men.
Yeah, usually
mostly.
And so we're going to set up that system. Any of us who don't fit into that system are going to annoy the system, if not flat out challenge it.
It's true.
So I think that's all the ranting I have for now. Do you have anything else to bring up? Anybody in the audience have a question or a comment? We know this is one of those things that's not as much fun to talk about as like WandaVision was, but we don't want you to go without an opportunity to ask a question or comment as we wrap up here.
Yeah, no, I don't think I have anything else. I just think, it can seem like it's another one of those things that can seem like a big thing to tackle. Like, well, how do I change this? But there's a lot of things you can do on a small level. Learn more about the place where you work, learn more about what organizations are working on it in your community, and advocating for pay equity and gender equity on whatever level. We can all make tiny changes. So when it feels overwhelming, just start with the tiny changes.
Yeah, and we'll be linking things in the show notes that are the tiny changes. And in, just to highlight what Dr. Aaron said, like one of the first things that we always say about the place to change is if your company provides, if your company provides toilet paper, your company needs to be providing period products because it's the same level of necessity. Mm-hmm. So that's a really small one. We know we have international viewers, so believe it or not, we'll say it again in case you've never heard it. The United States has absolutely no mandated parental or maternal leave whatsoever. It is actually, there's no legal mandate in the United States to give women off when they are giving birth. I actually have an employee here that works for us at Abby Color and who in her last position was called during labor by her boss. And that was seen as okay.
Sure. Yeah.
It's not.
Our friend Omar has commented, when you add in the pink tax, women have even less wealth. That's very true. If you don't know what the pink tax is, women's products or products marketed for women that are usually made pink are often charged more or taxed. So pads and tampons and menstrual supplies are taxed as luxury items in many places around the world, when they are necessary biologically, much like toilet paper or tissues, those kinds of things. But then we also do everything where we make like garden shears in pink and then charge $25 instead of $20 for the black ones.
My absolute favorite is the Bic pen. Oh. Do you remember that was going around a couple of years ago? It was like Bic for ladies or whatever, and it's literally just a ballpoint pen.
It's the same pen, it's just pink, and it was like $2 more.
Oh my God, dying. Yeah, so the pink tax is a thing for sure. I mean, like our razors cost more. People who don't menstruate don't need menstruation products, so that's automatic thing. All of our clothing costs more. Like it's just meh is how we feel about it. But yeah. We have literally changed workplaces by talking about the provision of menstrual products in public spaces, and where people in positions of power and authority like overheard our conversation, mm-hmm. and rectified the situation by putting free menstrual products in their bathrooms. So that's a great place to start. For sure. So wherever you are, wherever you're watching this, whenever you're listening to this or joining us, we have deep, deep faith that this can get better. I know we sound tired, and we certainly are. We've only been fighting this fight for 30 odd years. There's a lot of people that have been fighting it longer than us, but we deeply believe in humans' ability to change, which is one of the reasons we're having this conversation with you. Mm-hmm. And we all believe in our ability to enact small changes that can either agitate for larger ones or can provide immediate relief in the smaller change, for sure. Yep. So speaking of things that need agitation and change, next week we're going to be joined by our colleague Cheryl Westlung to talk about what COVID is like on college campuses right now.
Oh boy.
She works on a college campus and is the lead investigator on a grant that is talking about vaccination rates among American college students. So she's going to be joining us, and I think some of her students will be joining us in the chat as well to be explaining some of the emotions, maybe some of the challenges around vaccination and figuring out the United States, a lot of the United States colleges, for our international listeners, universities go back at the middle to end of August, and some are already back, especially if they're collegiate athletes. And so this is a very pressing matter to know what we're going to do in the fall. And some universities are choosing to say there's no masks in classrooms, which has a great effect on people's mental health. Some are saying that we're waiting and seeing. Some aren't even allowing visitors on campus anymore because they're taking the Delta variant so seriously. So we have a real range, as we know universities around the world have. So if somebody would like to come on and talk to us about universities in Paraguay, that sounds great. We're here for it. We just happen to know somebody at one in the United States who is going to come on next week and talk about it with us. We cannot wait. And in the meantime, don't forget too that if you've got empathy exercises that you'd like us to talk about, get in touch with us on a social and we'll be happy to chat about it.
Please do. We love hearing other people's perspectives and sharing stories from our global listeners and friends from all places. So we'll see you next week, everybody.
It's been a pleasure as always. Talk to you later. Bye.